Because really, what could go wrong once you press record, right?
Exactly. What could go wrong? It's all going to be very perfect. And that is an appropriate start to what is the Crazy People podcast. Chris, I welcome you to this podcast. Thank you so much for joining us here. And with me is my partner in crime, Russ. How are you today?
Very well, sir. Very well. It's very good to talk to you and to talk to Chris again.
All right, Chris. Could you do us a favor and give us a quick introduction of who are you, where you're from, what is your connection to either one of us?
Yeah, absolutely. Chris Wiedmar, based here in Louisville, Kentucky in the United States. Russ and I got connected initially through an NFT project called Party Horses. I'm one of the co-founders of Party Horses. This is a project that we formed the group initially back in December of 2021. And then we launched the project officially in March of this year. Russ and I connected over in-person community events we would have or bottle pickups that we would have because our NFT was tied to a bottle of Maker's Mark. And obviously, the other thing I'll add to that is we have... Oh, right there. Looking good. We also are in a newer channel, Discord. We've got a pretty good sized group and community in Discord. So I'll see Russ in there as well digitally if I don't see him in person.
Since it's a business podcast here, give me a background of where do you come from? What is your field that you work in? What are your interests that you work in?
Yeah, I've always been interested by technology, whether it be software, hardware, tools. When I graduated college, 14, 15 years ago, I majored in marketing and management, but didn't know what I wanted to be. And as luck would have it, I started out working for an IT staffing company. So it was an interesting mix of people and putting them in technology jobs. So it was a great way for me to learn about technology and how it all works in the business world. And I made a lot of great connections while doing that. A lot of those connections were more on the software development side of the house. And so that's where I made a lot of friends and made a lot of inroads. Starting out in IT staffing, I progressed in my career on the corporate side, more into business development, consulting, working for some of the bigger consulting and research firms in the world, where we would consult with CIOs and CTOs more on their business decisions. That was a lot of fun. And doing those things, I always had an entrepreneurial spirit as well. I think Party Horse would be the fifth company I've started. I would work for the corporate world for a little bit, do my own spinoff, hop back in. So some would have success and have an exit. Others would, I guess, somewhat deemed a failure, and others kind of more break even and everything in between. For me, it was always staying in that technology realm. I've always been fascinated by it and felt like I understood it. I think when I was more on the consulting side, I was able to get more wide on a variety of topics and understand a lot. And then over time, I dove in on deeper topics that make more sense to me and resonate more with me for my career. Really, the last 4 years, I've focused on certain projects that I want to work on, that I have a part in and have a say in. It's probably going to be staying for me on the entrepreneur side and not go back to the corporate world. I don't see that happening in my future.
All right.
Yeah, because looking at your LinkedIn profile, Chris, your career trajectory is crazy.
It is.
Right?
It is.
But it's super interesting because I think it shows that you're willing to take a risk, right? And I think that translates into some of the stuff that you're doing today, willing to try something risky, new, different, a little bit crazy, a lot crazy. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I think that's definitely spot on. And my wife would echo those sentiments. And so, Russ, I think some of the things I have done would probably be deemed, to your point, crazy to 95% of the world, just because I don't think a lot of people go out and jump and start their own business on certain things, much less stuff that we're doing now, which I think is even crazier in this Web3 and NFT world, and jump in and do things like that either. But, while it might be crazy to some, I think the benefit of having some wisdom of doing different roles and different jobs and being in different organizations, you can weigh that risk a little bit more, right? And so if you've got the right team going into a crazy project, you still have the support and feel good about it, right? If you've got a product that is in demand for a company I was with called Roth River, we were putting sensors and data in bourbon barrels where I knew that there was a massive problem. While it seemed crazy that we could go in and put something inside of an old wooden barrel, when I know there's a problem that can be fixed, it doesn't seem as crazy to me, right? While we would talk to, I'll give you an example, like we would talk to a lot of people in the bourbon industry when we had this Roth River product, and they're like, oh, you can never do that. That's insane. Nobody would ever do that. And we're like, oh, okay. You know what I mean? We've got some pretty smart engineers that have figured out a way to get in the barrel that's non-invasive. A lot of the things that we've done, people would definitely say is crazy to even try it or entertain it. But I think when you step back and you're living in it like we are, your head's almost in the trees a little bit, and you kind of see out into the forest and say, okay, yeah, this is a little bit crazy, but I also see how all these pieces are coming together and what it's making. And that's when it gets really fun, in my opinion. So yeah, definitely some crazy and some things that would seem somewhat risky, but I think everything that I've done has been calculated as well, to where knowing, hey, there's definitely some risk with some of these things, but I'm willing to take a chance and a bet that we'll probably win in the long run.
So what are some of the motivators that you have to take a risk or to change direction and to start something completely new?
I enjoy solving problems and I enjoy building teams. Those are two things I enjoy doing now. Like I said, I'm just a marketing and management major by trade. I'm not an engineer, but I know how to bring on the right team and the right talent and build a team to solve the problem and making sure that it's the right problem to solve, like we talked about earlier. So for me, that's a big driver. We talked a little bit about Louisville already. I'm passionate about where I'm from and where I live. And I want the city I'm in to be just as good and hopefully better for my kids, to where they want to live here when they grow up and not go to New York City or Berlin. You know what I mean? I love all those places, but I want Louisville to be just as cool. And I think for a city like that, especially in today's day and age, I think you've got to have some form of a technology ecosystem at the startup level. And I think the more and more we can do, it shines a light that, hey, you can do these things in Louisville. And hopefully that inspires other people to take a chance here as well. So that's another big thing that I'm passionate about, is seeing the city grow, because it's a place that I love and am passionate about. So that's a couple of the drivers for me. I like challenges, especially if people can say, oh, this will never work or you can't do that. I don't get to play as many sports as I did as a kid growing up. So the competition thing has always been there for me. And so I like to compete. And this is my way of getting competition now. Instead of playing on a football field or a basketball court, this is my way to kind of get that out, if that makes sense too.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I surrendered my claim to be a basketball player to my wife. Because ever since she keeps beating me, I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm not a ball player anymore. So I had to find other fields too. But hey, since you mentioned Louisville and that you're interested in growth of the city, I saw something that you seem to be passionate about, and that is an article that you read and commented about. It's a fast foodification of a city, or essentially everything that we live in. Highlight that, summarize that a little bit.
Yeah, there's a technologist and founder by the name of Greg Eisenberg that wrote that article. He's had some exits from some tech companies. What I like about him is I think he sees the world in a little bit of a different lens. And I think he views things in more community-led, not just cities, but just in general. Really what he was talking about when he said the fast foodization was a lot of the cities, you probably don't see it as much in Europe as we do in the States, but there's a number of cities, big cities that I could go to that I get off the highway and they all look the exact same, right? There's 10 McDonald's and Walmarts and all these same retail chains. You don't have like what we did back in the day where everything was unique and different. And that's not just restaurants and businesses, it's buildings and architecture and streets. I think that's something that it's been lacking, especially in America, the last 20 to 30 years. His point was the benefits of the change that can come with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree, because it's in Europe, you have it too. Some of the architecture not going to change that quick because it's grown for the past 1,000 or 2,000 years, or some of the cities even longer. But in terms of how people look like and what they're consuming, it's all the same, right? Like, because 10, 20, 30 years ago, it was something special to go to the US and buy certain brands. And then you would go to France, buy other brands, and Italy, buy yet completely different set. But now you have like essentially all the same, right? It's like plus one or two, but the core 50% is the same that you can get everywhere. That's an interesting thing. So how do you keep Louisville from becoming that, another carbon copy of some city?
Yeah, and I think if you wait and depend on the government, whether it be local, state, national, regardless of political affiliation, it's never going to be the group that comes in and swoops in and saves the day. They've got too many challenges and things that they need to put their time and energy to. I think it almost comes back and rests on citizens in that place. I'm not a designer nor an architect, and so I can't design buildings or streets or something like that. But what we can do is we can create interesting businesses and businesses that are enticing to someone young coming out of university that's 22 and that's evaluating moving to a Chicago, Austin, or New York. And they're like, oh, well, Louisville's actually doing some cool things around bourbon or with NFTs and Web3. I want to go here and take a chance in that city. I think if everybody contributes a little bit of what they're good at, it doesn't just have to be business, right? It can be a number of different things. I think that's how you uplift a city. And I think Louisville's done a pretty good job of being unique and not having as much as the cookie cutter and fast foodization like we talked about, but there'll always be some of that creeps in. And so I think the more that each citizen can bring to the table and add kind of value, I think a lot of those little wins add up to some big wins. That's kind of where I see that we can add value.
You've been working with big brands and small brands and startups, right? The Party Horses group, you're working with Maker's Mark, gigantic, mega corporation. And an hour later, you're meeting with the local startup community and teaching them. Tell us a little bit more about that sort of breadth of experience and what that brings to the city and brings to your life.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point, Russ. I've not just now, but in the past, I've worked with some of the biggest companies in the world, Fortune 10 companies that I've done projects with, to your point, startups and everything in between. And, you know, what I've learned is there's amazing and great and talented and smart people worked with. The issues I find most are in the big corporate enterprise world. When we talk about risk and crazy, that's not going to happen. Right. And which is a shame, because I think you've got some of the smartest subject matter experts in those fields that know what their company needs to move forward in this next wave of technology or what their customer needs. But what I find at that large corporate level is that person might know it and they might pitch it to their boss, but their boss isn't going to put their neck on the line because they've got a big bonus at the end of the year and they don't want to upset the apple cart. A lot of frustration I've had when dealing with the corporate world is their risk aversion, which I get to a degree, but also it's like, hey, there's a reason you got to where you are as this big company. It's probably because you took some bets and some risk, and they get a little flat and lazy once they get there. To build on your original point, when we started Party Horses and we had a phone call with a brand and a company as big as Maker's Mark in early January of this year, and we said, hey, we're just a ragtag group of guys that came together to build this NFT, and we want to give everybody that buys it a rare collaborative bottle of Maker's Mark. I think a lot of people thought they'd probably laugh in our face, but I think we got lucky on the timing side. They had made a couple new hires that understood what this Web3 and NFT landscape was going to look like. I think they took a smart bet where they said, hey, we're not going to go ahead and put all of our chips in on NFTs or Web3, but hey, we can collaborate and partner with this group, understand the pros and cons and what comes with it, and still be seen as innovative. And so to me, I think they're a really good example of a brand that's not afraid to try new things. And so I give makers a ton of credit. They're definitely not afraid to push the envelope. So that to me was really exciting, and it still continues to be exciting. I was just on a lengthy call with them the other day. I mean, they still want to keep doing some interesting things with us.
So agility is your startup's recipe for success in your eyes? Is that what it is?
I think agility for sure. I would add with agility, people say the word pivot a lot, but it's true. Like, okay, hey, we've been testing product A for 3 months and it's not getting the results we want, but we're getting the feedback that, hey, we need to do this, this, and this. Okay, here's what product B needs to look like. Well, we're not going to wait for a full calendar year when budget releases and all this to come around and do product B. It's like, no, let's listen and let's go and do it now. And I think it's just hard when you're such a massive organization to think like that, because there's so many moving pieces, versus like, hey, if you're a lean team of 7 folks, you can do that and you can do it fairly easily. And so, yeah, I think that's a huge advantage that, you know, startups have over your traditional enterprise clients, no doubt.
Yeah. So you've done a hard pivot like that in one of your startups before?
So we were building a tennis application for a startup, and it was partnering with the U.S. Tennis Association. So think, you know, for those that aren't familiar, that's the same thing as the NBA or the NFL, just at the tennis level. And both groups were pretty confident in what they thought they needed for the app. And what they thought was they needed an app to just book a tennis court. And we thought, okay, cool. But hey, let's talk to about 20 to 30 tennis players and make sure we understand. And what our research found was they much rather play with someone of a similar skill set. There was some other things that we found in the research jumped just playing on Tuesday nights at 7. But that was a hard conversation to have with the groups that were paying for that app that we built, because they were hell bent on this needs to be the first piece of code in there, and then this and this and this. And we say, okay, we can do that. We'll take your check. But, we wouldn't be doing our job as your partner on this, because the data and the research, we showed 25 interviews that said, no, I'd much rather play with someone that's a 3.0 plus. And so I think to your original question, if you've got the data and user research to back it up, it's a lot easier to do that instead of just saying, well, this is my gut. This is why you need to go right instead of left. But like we had videos that we would chop up and consolidate to like a 3-minute that showed, okay, look, when you've got 25 people all saying they want this and not that, that's gonna get their attention, and they're gonna be. And the cool thing is, Maurice, is it can be a little nerve-wracking, especially when you've got some big CEOs and executives in a room. But when they see it and the light bulb moment goes off, right, and they're like, oh, okay, and they're like, that's what they want, and you're like, yeah, and so that's what makes it even more fun, because if they see it and then they buy in, then you really get momentum when you start building.
I mean, that's the ideal case, that the light bulb goes up, right? I've had some situations where nothing happened on the other side. And they were like, yeah, your data. I don't care about your data. I keep doing what I'm doing. And I'm like, oh, okay.
I know better than all of the other users. That's
exactly.
Yep.
I've been doing this for 20 years.
Oh yeah. Now, don't get me wrong. There's plenty of ego that I've run into as well. And I don't want to sit here and paint it as always great outcomes and unicorns and rainbows. Like I said, there's definitely some headstrong egos that you'll run into. But I think the more, in regardless of data, like I said, if I can show it visually sometimes, whether it be like an interview, I think sometimes that resonates sometimes too. But yeah, it's not always going to be easy. That's for sure.
And along those lines, so you talked about it's not all going to be rainbows and unicorns, right? So what has been some of your failures where you just hit a wall and for one reason or the other? So
yeah,
let's know something about that.
I had a startup that I did with some friends called Groom Q, the groom side in the wedding planning process, because the wedding industry, if you look at the numbers, it's crazy. I mean, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's pretty recession-proof. Like, people that are in love are going to get married. But the whole industry is really catered around the bride's to-dos and the task and all that kind of stuff. This was about 10 years ago we did this. And so a lot of us were in weddings and kept being like, let's just make it easy for guys, because we're pretty simple creatures at the end of the day if you give us a list. And so we knew we were solving the right problem. We had interviewed well over 100 different guys that were getting married, that had been in the process of getting married. And we knew the tool we needed to build, but this was our first go about building real technology. And so we didn't know any better, but long story short, we didn't hire the right development team to build it. And it just was clunky. It didn't work. There were errors. And really the only good thing that came out of this thing was this map tool that we built for bachelor parties, which is completely random. But the general platform failed because we couldn't get it built the right way and we ran out of money. Fortunately, we were able to save a little bit of face because this mapping software we sold to a group and made a little bit of money, not enough obviously to keep the thing going, but it was a good learning lesson in picking the right team, being confident that people can execute on what they say they can execute on. The other one that stings is I helped run a software development design firm. We would partner globally with companies like GE in China and Dubai and build massive projects and platforms for them, to startups and everything in between. And the team, this is kind of the opposite. The team that we had was, I mean, it was like the Avengers. Rarely would there be something technical you could throw at us that I would say, yeah, we can't do that. We had a unique mix of designers, user experience practitioners, and engineers and developers that all came together to build world-class products. When I took over, I didn't realize some of the financial issues we were dealing with. And the stress you have of being an agency and a services-based business where you're constantly waiting on that next client to come in. And if you have breaking that, and a lot of people on high salaries, they can snowball quick. And so we had to close that down right before COVID. It hurt a lot just because I put our team against anybody anywhere. So having to lay off all those folks, there's about 20 of us, including myself, that one still stings. And the part that hurts the most too is I've got friends that run other software design and development agencies, and like they all had their best years ever during COVID because all these big companies needed help digitally when, hit the fan. And I'm fortunate that have great relationships with a lot of those folks to this day. And you never know what the future will hold, but that's one that still stings because it was a great culture, family-like environment, but some things were done wrong on the finance side that came to bite us.
Yeah. So after that, is that when you started with NFTs? That is something that I talked to a friend about the other day, if we should be engaged in NFT business, but where we just held back at this point. So let us know, what are you doing in the NFT business? What is going right for you there?
I was actually doing a different startup before I got into this Party Horses NFT space. I had a good friend named Justin Delaney, and Justin had success and was trying to figure out what he wanted to do next. He's just a guy that's got 20 different businesses on his brain nonstop. And so he'd go through 20 different idea and pitch decks to me and be like, which one do you like? And I'm like, dude, some of these things, I don't even know what you're talking about. It's way over my pay grade. Randomly enough, there was this one that we both kind of took interest to, and it was actually a crypto coin that was backed by inflation-proof assets. And I won't go through all the details, but it was a big swing if we took a swing at this thing. And Justin's one of those guys that's a little crazy like me and not afraid to take some risk. And so I said, look, before we get any further on this, because he's not a software engineer either, I said, let's bring in a friend of mine, Isaac Pratt, who works at Facebook, who's in the Web3 NFT space. And let's have him spec out how crazy this thing could be. It was going to be too big of a bite to take off with what we wanted to do. We would have had to raise a lot of money and stand up a lot of things. And so we said, well, let's start smaller in this. And another guy on our team, Brooke Smith, has done well and is in a bunch of different businesses. And he was like, well, why don't you all take my racehorses and put them on the blockchain? And we're like, that's a whole nother crazy thing. But when he said that, our other friend was, well, what if we did an NFT that embraced the racehorses as if they went to the track to watch the humans race? And so it was kind of a joke. And he was like, we could call it Party Horses. And we all started laughing. But then we all kind of kept thinking about it, like, man, that's an interesting concept. And so we said, let's figure out what we need to make it happen. And so fortunately, we had two people right away that were happy to invest and get this thing going off the ground. Isaac, who I mentioned before, could build it. And we really needed to find a couple other people to help him more on the artist side of things. So I mentioned the company I had to shut down. One of our best designers and artists was a guy named Robbie Davis, who I was still friends with. Robbie was chomping at the bit to get in this NFT space. He was like, hell yeah, man, what do I need to do? I said, well, let's all get together. So we had this ragtag team that we put together, honestly, in about 2 weeks. There was 7 of us to start. Everybody kind of had their own lane on what they were doing. I was more kind of bringing everybody together. And that's when we decided back in late December, early January, let's do this thing. It took those guys every bit of 3 months to build what goes into Party Horses, because Party Horses is what's called a generative NFT project. Robbie's not hand drawing 3,300 horses. He draws all the traits and attributes. And then Isaac takes this code that we put the rarity curve in, and then it's almost like a blender, and what spits out are these random horses. Those guys were busy building that. We were setting up relationships with groups like Maker's Mark and event planners so we could have real world utility. We wanted to make sure you had something at least backing the great art you were going to get. This partnership with Maker's Mark, we're doing a rare limited amount of bottles. They'll probably be, I think when it's all said and done, it'll be about 10 different bottles we'll do with them. What's interesting, you've got these people that are very digital savvy that are in this NFT world that understand it. But then we brought in these bourbon collectors and hunters who saw the value because they're like, well, there's only going to be 3,000 of these bottles that are out there. That means they're already limited. They're already rare. So educating a new group of people that have never downloaded a crypto wallet and taken funds from their bank and put it into Ethereum. And so there was a lot of education that went on just to get people to that point. But what's really been cool when we started meeting people in other cities is just the diverse background of people that we've met. So I was meeting with a farmer that was in a small town in Kentucky that drove 3 hours to one of our meetups and was like, yeah, man, I bought them while I was on my tractor and I bought 3 of them. And I'm like, that's cool. And he was like, I got so into your alls, I found like 4 other NFT projects. I caught a flight that night and was in New York City the next day and was with a big Wall Street banker that bought like 10 of them. The types of people in this space, that's what makes it really cool. It's been really fun to see what we've built. And while it feels like we've done this thing for 10 years, it's kind of wild to see how much you can do in a short amount of time.
Okay. There seems to be a kind of a common thread between some of these things that you're doing about bringing together the right people, right? One of the key things that seems to be emerging in the NFT space is getting a passionate community of maybe it's bourbon collectors and investors and tech people and horse racing people and whatever else it is, some kind of community. Maybe tell us a little bit more about that thread there.
Yes, the team, I think, is key in the fact that everybody knew what they needed to do to get it done and did it. The guys that we brought in are A performers. And I think that the personality types all got along too, which is important. We've all been on teams where so-and-so wants the credit, the accolades. What's cool about our group is nobody really cared about that. It was more about the whole versus the individuals kind of having succeeding. But to your second point, Russ, I think what's been really exciting is this community that's come from these NFTs being released into the wild. We use Discord as a platform to just share updates. And really, it's turned into just more of a general chat for a number of us on topics of the day. And then there's subsections to people talking about fantasy football, to sports betting, to sneakers and bourbon, and anything that our group's kind of interested in. There's different subsets and interest for people to get involved in. And that's what's kind of cool too, is not just seeing the daily and hourly interactions that go on Discord, but there's been a number of folks that literally have taken it from like, oh, they met someone in the Party Horses Discord to they drove 3 hours in California and grabbed some beers with some guys. So seeing like organic friendships come up out of this has been really cool to see as well. When you talk about community-led projects, this is one that to me, I don't think we knew what was going to happen. And I'd be lying if I said we did. They're like, oh yeah, we look up and 8 months from now, you're going to have all these people that are getting together for this and coming to this event. And you're like, we had no idea. We thought we were just going to build some cool art, get some bourbon out there, have some fun parties. And I think what's evolved is much, much bigger and better than we could have ever imagined. So to me, that's been one of the fun things that have come from this, no doubt. And just the great people I've met. And like I said, not even just people. I mean, a lot of these guys I consider my friends because I talk to a lot of these people online more than I talk to, my cousin who lives 6 blocks away from me sometimes. So it's just kind of funny how some of these relationships form, no doubt. But it's been awesome. There's no two ways about it.
Which kind of brings us full circle with the article by Greg Eisenberg, right? Where he said in the article that it's going to be more community-driven products versus just some big corporation that dumps something on us, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Cool. Very nice. So as we start to wrap it up, I have a couple of questions for you. So because the NFT business or the digital business as a whole is fast moving. So how do you stay current? What are you doing in that area?
Yeah, you have to. In previous jobs I've had, you could always follow a blueprint of like, okay, hey, you have this product you got to sell. Well, let's get Facebook ads or Instagram ads. And that's how you bring an audience. There was kind of a blueprint you could always follow. And in this world and in this space, I mean, it changes sometimes by the day. And so I'm fortunate in the sense that I've got guys on my team that we're constantly texting and emailing like, oh, did you see this article last night? Or hop in this channel right here and read this. And so, the fact that I think a lot of us are entrenched in it anyways, and not just in the Party Horses groups. I'm a member in other groups that are bigger than ours and smaller than ours. And, I can kind of take and pull things that I like. I think that's been key as well, is that we're all kind of learning in this space as we go along. I think the key thing too is, we had some principles and a mission early on was, hey, we were going to make really cool art. We're going to deliver on this bourbon. We're going to have great events, and we're going to have an authentic community and not just try to inflate and puff ourselves up. And so I think as long as the core keeps going back to that and making sure that the community is taken care of, we'll stay on top of the trends. Right now, quite frankly, it's been a pretty bear market for the last few months. And we've seen a lot of other groups kind of get eradicated, honestly, just because they run out of money and didn't really think about it, from a business standpoint, which I do give us credit. We look at this as a brand. The NFT is a part of the brand, obviously, and it's the big thing that got us going. But, we see a lot more for Party Horses down the line outside of just the NFT. Now, the NFT is what gets you the ticket in. But, there's a lot more opportunity that we can do with it. And I think the fact that we all at least had the foresight to look 12, 24, 36 months down the line and knowing that we might need to pivot on some stuff, and we're cool with that, but we're not looking at it in chunks of 2 weeks. I mean, the key initiatives, yeah, but no, at the end of the day, we were pretty set on this is our goals. Here's how we're going to hit them. That's why we've had success, in my opinion.
Fantastic. How do you organize that? I mean, planning this is one nightmare, and then you have a family, right? So how do you keep the balance there?
I think I've been fortunate in the sense that there's people in the community that have reached out to me that want to take on more responsibility that weren't part of the team originally, that have felt such a passion and a sense of belonging that they're like, hey, I think the people that's in our group, they understand who we are and what we're about. They know that we're there if something goes wrong, and we'll fix it. We're not just trying to make a quick buck off anybody. And so for us, I think the authenticity is key, and that they know that, we're in this for the long haul and not just a cash grab and we're done. That's why I think we've had success too, is that, like I said, we've been very transparent from the get-go about where we want to go and take this thing. And I think the fact that we've executed on everything so far we said we would do. Now, sometimes things take a little longer than we had hoped. Russ is aware of that on some of we've had some legal challenges on some things. So sometimes some of the timeline might get pushed back, 6 to 8 weeks on certain things, but that's not, because we want to, it's because sometimes our attorneys are saying it's in your best interest to push certain things back. But I think literally everything we've said so far we've done. And that's been big for us. It's not over promise and under deliver, but almost kind of the reverse.
Cryptocurrency and bourbon and racing horses. I mean, what could possibly go wrong?
Right. Oh, absolutely, man. Yeah, it's a wild world, no doubt.
Looking back at everything that you've done in the past, let's say 20 years, what would be the message that you have for your 16-year-old self?
I think trust your gut, because there's been times when I didn't trust my gut and I would let other outside influences kind of influence which way I would go on certain decisions. So I think that's one. And I think working with great people would be the other thing. I worked for someone one time because they were incredibly wealthy, put it that way, and they'd done well in business, right? It was a miserable job. And so I think things like that it's the right people and not just who you think are the best people, if that makes sense. So I think, trust your gut, work with the right people, and typically good things will happen.
Okay, I have one more for you.
Yeah.
The biggest career risky move that you've ever done, like the biggest error, the biggest mistake you ever done, where you say, like, I'm supposed to get fired over this.
We had the executives of a Fortune 500 spirits company in a room that we were presenting on. A lot of healthy egos, didn't want to be told they were doing things wrong. They were so worried about so-and-so competitors doing this and so-and-so competitors doing that. And I kind of stopped the room and I said, guys and gals, I said, you all are too worried about your side view mirrors and not what's coming up in your rear view mirror, which is cannabis. And it's going to kick your ass. And you're all not even thinking about it. And you have no plan around it. And to me, I think I went a little too heavy into it, but I was like, the fact that you all don't have a plan to combat that, some heads should roll. And people started coming to me, and I'll never forget my boss, like his eyes were about to bug out of his head. And, but it was something that I know I knew I was right about. I think I just got a little excited in the moment, and I shouldn't have probably went as hard at him as I should have. But I think some of those people needed a little bit of a punch in the mouth, because I do feel they were worried about the wrong things when there was a much bigger storm coming. That's one that happened about 5 years ago that I still kind of laugh about. And my former boss will still text me randomly, just what he's thinking about it sometimes too. So that's one that I definitely feel like he had my back. Fortunately, like I said, I think if it had been another boss, they would have been like fired on the spot. But
let's make that yours.
yeah. So that's definitely one that comes to mind for sure.
Fantastic, Chris.
There's a book or a movie or even a teacher that's really impacted you somewhere along the way. What is it?
That's a good one.
Oh man, that's a good one. Yeah, someone that's impacted me because I've been fortunate to work with them in a few different capacities. It's a guy named Brooks Smith, who's a partner of mine at Party Horses, but he had invested in the software development company that I was telling you guys about that unfortunately had failed. I think something that he's always instilled with me is just keeping a positive mindset. But more importantly, he's always talked about giving back and not always worrying about yourself and what's next. He's like, good things will always happen if you're giving back. I think his impact on me and just his outlook, he's probably 15, 20 years older than me. So I think someone like that's got some more wisdom, that's been through some things. It's good for me to have someone like that in my life that keeps me in check. He's someone that has stayed even keel regardless. And so that to me has had a big impact, no doubt.
Very cool. Very cool.
Very cool. Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure having you here. Thank you so much. Thanks for being a guest in our slightly crazy podcast.
No,
And
I
then
appreciate you guys having me. This has been a blast. It really has. I've enjoyed chopping it up with you guys.